Like I said, this has been a long time coming, and it's hard not to care. You know, you when you get a bad review, it feels bad. If you get a good review, it feels good. But you can't let it go too far one way or the other because you just figure that if there's one person out there that it really connects with and really helps them in some way, then
Hmm.
it's been worth the effort. You know, just
Exactly.
find a small group of people, or even just like I said, just one person, frankly, who is really changed or affected, then you've done your honest work as an artist.
Hmm. No,
Well,
it's
and
totally true.
that is so true. And I mean, this is like a perfect segue to just get started.
Yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about I want to hear from each of you the origin story of this project from your
Okay.
perspective.
Okay.
I think I probably have to start that because it was my seed originally. About 10 years ago, I've been involved in meditation and martial arts and yoga and things like this for most of my, most of my life, all my life, it feels like at this point. And Buddhism's Eightfold Path, part of the Four Noble Truths, right mindfulness, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, struck me as a really fantastic model of how can we guide our actions and how do we see our lives, how do we guide our being so as to be on a path of personal evolution. And I got this idea of doing an EC Comics, a collection of EC Comics style short stories, each of which represented one of these things. And I didn't have the leverage to get it done, nor did I have the clarity exactly on how to do it. But it was actually over conversations with Charles Johnson, who I met 20 years ago, and as a Buddhist scholar, these questions would come up in our conversation, just how to be in the world. And I don't think he understands how, before I ever mentioned the project to him specifically, how important those conversations were. And I knew that when I met him, that I'd met someone who I could partner with on something like this that would make damn sure that the project was respectful, because I'm not formally a Buddhist. I can respect it as much as I can, but that's not my path specifically. So I needed someone who was on the inside of that, who was also a literary person, who loved comic books, who would not look down on the problem. So I eventually approached him and asked whether or not he would be interested in this, and he expressed enthusiasm. And then later on, in conversations with John Jennings, when I found out he had his own imprint, the Megascope, he expressed interest in the project, and so that gave me, I had motive, means, and opportunity at that point. So it's time to commit literary murder. So I think that let me kind of leave that there for a moment and pass the ball to Chuck.
Okay. Steve, I believe we first met in 1999.
Hmm.
Tanana Reeve, your wife, and I got some award from something called the Go Girl Book Club.
Yeah, go on, girl.
Go on, Girl Book Club. And I walked in, I congratulated her, and she said, "Oh, do you want to meet Steve?" And I thought, it has to be Steve Barnes. We had not met before, but I wrote about you in a book I did in 1988 called Being in Race, Black Writing Since 1970. Because I read about you. You were a martial artist. You were writing science fiction, which is one of my passions since I was a kid. And you're black. And I thought, Jesus Christ, this guy's me. Who is this guy, right? So we met in 1999. And because you were living up here briefly, you and Stan and Reeve, we could get together. We could talk. We could go to August Wilson plays, and kind of hang
Remember
out.
that marathon conversation we had with August? Just wow, it was like 5 hour conversation that night.
Yeah, it could have been. He and I would go from 7 at night at the Broadway Bar and Grill on Capitol Hill until 2 in the morning when they would kick us out. We'd still be talking on the sidewalk. But we go back, like a long way like that. I should say one other thing. We did a story together, 4189, right? Which is in this graphic novel, illustrated by Bryan beautifully. But we worked this out together. I met you were here for a sci-fi conference. I met you at the hotel. We went back and forth on the story, and then you test read it aloud, just to check. So that story is in my last collection of short stories called Nighthawks. And it was a great collaboration. I really enjoyed working with you. And the reason for that is because you are prolific. You are a writer who knows from the inside story. So I have to say, all kudos really goes to Steve. With this Eightfold Path graphic novel, Steve came, he did all the meat and potatoes. You brought the meat and potatoes to it. The story idea, the plot, the characters. And then I simply came in later as a practicing Buddhist. I took my vows in the Soto Zen tradition in 2007, but I've been a student of Buddhism my whole life. I just came in and gave a little seasoning, to the meat and potatoes, little philosophical seasoning. So I think collaboratively, we've been able to work together in the past, seamlessly. And it's a great joy and an honor and a pleasure.
Oh, it's such an honor to me. I mean, my memory of our meeting is that Tananari was getting an award at the Go On Girl Book Club, and we're sitting at a table, and you come over, and it says Charles Johnson, and of course, I knew, oh my God, the middle passage, my God, literary lion standing at my table, talking to my wife. I'm just like, oh my God, this is like, do I ask for his autograph on a napkin? What do I do? And then she said, I'd like to introduce my husband, Stephen Barnes. And you said, your face went blank for a second. You said, Stephen Barnes? The Stephen Barnes? the fact that Chuck knew who I was like, oh God.
That's crazy, right?
To become friends with this man and then later collaborators. Life doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah.
But your reputation precedes you, Steve.
Well, that's how I felt when I met Steve. And I was like, oh my goodness, it was crazy. So, I think we met at what? It had to be the event that me and Adeli Funama put together at Marymount University. That was the first time we met, I think. Oh, what? Nope, that's not right. Atlanta.
Oh,
when Tananari was at Spelman, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I was like, that's how I felt. I was starstruck by Charles. So I was like,
you do what you can with your life, and if you put yourself into it, then you find yourself on the path with other people who have also invested themselves in their work. And it's just so wonderful to meet other people on that path and be able to say, what's the journey been like for you? And what does the territory look like for you? And they have this sense of aliveness about them because they're constantly creating their lives rather than trying to fit into a box. And there's nothing that I like better, that I find more of a reward for the life that I've been living than meeting people like John Jennings and Charles Johnson and now Bryan. Just people who are real artists. I mean, you're actually invested. It doesn't matter where you are on the path. You're on the path. And I love it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think the way that I got involved, and John, you have to help me because it's been a while. But I think, John, you mentioned to me about the book. Well, how many years ago was that?
I mean, Megascope is only what? I mean, we started like 3 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, so it was been really early on, I think it was. And then when, I don't know how I got a hold of the script, but when I got on board with the book and everything, and I was like, okay, well, let me do my research. And I was familiar with Charles and Steve in general, right? But then you have to do your research, you have to do your homework. And so I go in and I'm looking at everything. And as I'm typing and reading, my hands are sweating. And I'm like, how am I going to do this? After researching and realizing, like, these are people I idolize, and, then I want to deliver to John. So it was a very emotional process. And that's how I knew that I wanted to do it. So it was like more a really sincere approach. And that's where that commitment comes from with doing a book, you know what I mean? Because it's not like you do it overnight and then it's done.
No,
it's a very, very long process.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so just getting on board at that point, my barrier to entry was pretty straightforward. But then I knew like I had to like step up and do my part because yeah, remember it's their first graphic novel. Like I'm assuming, right, Charles and John. Charles and Steve. This is your first major graphic novel, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's comes a responsibility with that, right? You have to honor their legacy and also deliver something contemporary that doesn't feel like antiquated. You have to make it a hip, because you want people to read it. And
Mhm.
so the level to engage with that, John and I were talking about one reason they picked me up was because of the styles. I could jump styles. So when he said 8 different stories, 8 different styles, I was like, okay, I can manage that part. That's actually the easy part. So yeah, it came down to honoring their legacy and making sure that the words communicated clearly and to show that. So hopefully that worked out. Hopefully I did that, Steve and Charles.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, just kind of backtrack a little bit. When I got a chance to pitch, well, first of all, I'm very grateful to Andrew Smith and Charles Kochman for giving me an opportunity to even create Megascope, which happened literally over like over dinner in Chicago at ALA one night. And just kind of pitched the idea. But the Eightfold Path, I think we were talking about this. We had to be talking about this earlier because the Eightfold Path was part of the pitch. You know what I'm saying? It was actually Eightfold Path was one of the books that I first wanted to do. As far as, and I think I had like about 15 books or so, like Pie in the Sky. If I could get these people, these are the people I want to work with, right? And it was like people like Tanana Even Steve, Yatasha Womack, Daniel Jose Older, people like that. And lo and behold, all those people are signed on the, everybody for not the projects that I thought they were going to be signed for, but but they're on the list, And slowly but surely, I'm working through this dream list of people that I want to work with, and Eightfold Path was part of that. And I want to say Steve sent me like a cursory like overview of what what the stories would be. The hardest part was actually pitching it, you know what I'm saying? Because
Right.
Because it's like
an anthology, John.
Well, yeah, so it's difficult because Abrams, they're not, they don't necessarily do the best with like comics anthologies yet, right? And the other thing is that it's a very abstract and beautiful concept book, because it's conceptual. I know it's a dream where y'all to work together on it, and so I had to find a language to talk about the book, So I was like, well, it's like, using the terms like it's like the illustrated man, or like it has these
Right.
connections to Afrofuturism, Buddhism, Black speculative culture, societal issues. It's speaking through like the language of say like the Twilight Zone or Outer Limits, which honestly I was rereading it last night. It totally has all of that, by the way. And I've read it like a million times at this point. I'm sitting with it last night. Because I wanted to like just have it fresh in my head, and I'm reading through it and I'm like, this does feel like the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits and EC Comics as like an epistemology to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But when I say like Canterbury
it's almost
Tales,
John as
yeah.
It's almost John as creating like a new standard for an anthology. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I sincerely feel that way. That's what we delivered.
It takes like the classic wraparound. I mean, it has so many classical things in it, right? Because you have like the classic like wraparound tale, like the Illustrated Man, or like or something like Arabian Nights. It has these classic connections to it, and totally remixes it with like this funky, beautifully funky, pulp style, right? It's taken the language of what people used to think is pedestrian and elevating it. And then with your art style, and by the way, Steve, like everyone that I showed a book to, the first thing that they say is like, "Oh my God, this is beautiful."
Great. That's what I wanted to hear.
Well, comics art. And see, the thing is, like, people forget that comic books are an abstraction. Comics are abstraction. So you don't want to actually come at someone with a very very heavy intellectual background, and then have it be disrupted by an art style that's actually too heavy. So you want something that's actually
it moves.
It's abstraction. It moves. It's fluid. And you have to think about it, because people are sitting with this. This is a long book. It's complex, and you want people to sit with it. And these are the editorial things. And so when this came across my desk, and I was like, okay, this could really happen. I mean, I think Bryan was probably the first person I thought of, when we were having conversations about it, just because of the fact that he has this almost mercurial attitude towards how he makes art. Very quick, but considered, very considered in a particular way that I felt like the story would lend itself to. And again, as you were saying, Steve, earlier, I mean, you know, you're making the best product you can. You know, the book is not going to be for everybody, but guess what? It's going to be for a lot of people. How about that?
You know, that's
There are people-
all I
there
can
are a lot
hope
of
for,
people.
because the question of how should we be in the world, how
Right.
can we be in the world but not of the world? You know, the
Yes.
yogic, you know, householder yogi notion is very important to me, and it's very
Mhm.
important to a lot of people. How can we interact with politics, with religion, with our families, with our careers, and yet still have our eyes on the fact that death is inevitable and our lives have to mean something beyond just how much money do I have in my bank account. You know,
Mhm.
the questions are eternal. The question of trying to put a new spin on something like that, good God,
Yes, I
you
know,
know,
right?
who the hell am I to try to think that I can, you know, remix that? But
Right.
who I am is someone who is willing to give it the best shot he has and to find the best allies he can, and then to let the market decide and the audience decide. And then hopefully there will be, just like I said, one person out there, you know, or a group of people who read it and find that there's something here that touches them. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. So what's gonna
One
happen?
thing I
Also,
one
go
thing I
ahead.
find really interesting is, as we talk, is this intersection between, you know, religion and philosophy. Yeah, we think of those as going, we think of those as going together, right? You know, they're often categorized together. But I think it's interesting that this move into horror and science fiction, right? In particular, I have a personal love or a personal interest in what happens when you bring together religion and science fiction. You know, which people seem shocked, because I'm very much a Star Trek fan. And Star Trek, you know, it's like it just deals with religion as this, often just as this this quaint little difference between people, right? When as like a person in the world, I look at religion as the thing that guides science more often than science guides religion. So I'm really intrigued by that decision, and I'd like to hear some more conversation about what it means for you personally to bring together religion, philosophy, and horror, and then religion, philosophy, and science fiction. What you see as the difference what you see as the difference between science fiction and horror in that context.
Chuck, do you have anything to say about that before I start rattling my mouth? I just want to, you know.
Well, yeah, I could go on for a long time with that question. I'll say first off, that I told people about this project that it was the Eightfold Path kind of lensed through EC Comics. I could see the cognitive dissonance, you know, right there in their eyes. Like, how do you do that? Let me back up a couple of more steps, Stanford, and say that in the West, okay, the meaning of philosophy, the literal meaning of the word philosophy, is the love of wisdom. Now, if you put it that way, the love of wisdom, you find philosophy in many different forms. You know, in the last 2,000 years, wisdom is evident in in stories, in essays. It doesn't have to be the kind of formal analytic philosophy that dominates philosophy departments right now. I, in particular, I didn't, as an artist, I thought analytic philosophy was where the heart goes to die. All right. So of the traditions available to us, American philosophy, analytic philosophy, and phenomenology, or continental philosophy, that's where I went, because that's where artists are usually attracted to. Scientists tend to be attracted, people with a strong science background tend to be attracted to analytic philosophy. But artists are mainly attracted to phenomenology. And the names go on.
Charles,
forever.
it's so funny. It's so funny you say that, because I've been studying that for years. And so it's so funny. I'm so flabbergasted that you keyed in on that. So thank you for that.
Well, I mean, look at the people who were the major phenomenologies. Existential phenomenology with Sartre, right? Who is
Right.
a writer and a playwright and all these different things. It's where the artists tend to gather, I think, in terms of a method. And it's true, religion and philosophy have often been talked about in the same breath. What is the Middle Ages except medieval philosophy? From
Right.
Augustine to Aquinas to any number of names. As a practicing Buddhist, though, I was looking last night. I've been looking at for several nights now on YouTube at Thich Nhat Hanh's talks. And some of them are absolutely incredible. It's like almost listening to the Buddha, almost listening. So what you realize if you're a practicing Buddhist, or you have any kind of spiritual practice, is that this is not a thing you do just on Sunday. You do it every moment and day of your life. Steve's talking about the Eightfold Path: right thought, right view, right action, right speech, right livelihood, right mindfulness, right concentration. We are all about what the epigraph, hang on a second, to the Eightfold Path says. And I'm going to find it in 1 second. It is your mind that creates this world.
Mm-hmm.
That is something to ponder for the rest of our lives. It is our mind, our perception that creates the lived experience in which we find ourselves. So if you practice mindfulness, you're always looking at the contents of your own mind, your own feelings, which are ephemeral. They are impermanent because everything in the universe, including the universe, is impermanent and will die. And once you get unhooked from the idea of permanence, essence, essentialism, an enduring self, you're on your way towards liberation. I do think the stories here, in a negative way, point us toward that kind of wisdom, right? And so one of the things I really enjoyed doing was the essay on the Eightfold Path that's in the back of the book.
It's so wonderful too, by the way. I mean, yes, I was rereading your essay last night, and I was like, man, it's everything you need. I can definitely see this finding an audience and people studying not only different various media, but also religion and divinity and the entire piece. So I can definitely see it doing well in those spaces. And I love the fact that you have a copy of it right in front of you. I know it's like the low res.
Yeah, that's like the first hard copy.
Yeah, he printed it out. So when he got the PDF, he printed it out. And
let me add. Thank you so much, Chuck. That just thank you. 3 deep bows. Religion, philosophy, and spirituality, 3 different subjects that all are looking at the same question. Philosophy is asking what is true, and who am I? It is the epistemology, the how do we know what we know? What is there to know? Spirituality, I think, is asking a very specific aspect of that, which usually dealing with the ultimate question of what is the disposition of my soul? What is the soul? And sometimes how can we be together? There are relatively mundane aspects of spirituality that have to do with how can we treat one another in this world, as opposed to how can we address ourselves so that the deity, if deity there is pleased with us. To me, in some ways, spirituality is the living tree that some human being, generally, who had an epiphany, who had a total breakthrough, the Buddhas of the universe, the Jesus, the Muhammad's, they see something clearly and they try to give this to the people around them, and the tree grows. After they are dead, you can either eat fruit from the tree if the tree continues to grow, but more likely the tree gets cut down and they build a building out of it, and now there are a set of rules that people who did not have that direct perception create so that we can continue to be guided. And that's when politics comes into it, all sorts of other stuff. But to me, all the world's religions are looking at the same phenomenon of what is the ultimate nature of reality and the ultimate nature of humanity. And philosophy is the scalpel with which we try to cut away, which is what is not essential. So if the question is, who are we and what is true, then you can take a look at storytelling. And to me, when Joseph Campbell compared the different, stories of different countries, usually European based, but if you take a look at Asian and African and Central America, these are all, to me, they're the elders of the village trying to tell the young people in the village, this is what your life is going to be. This is the process of moving between birth and death, sliced up into small journeys. This person is going to fight the ogre. This person is going to try to find love. This person is going to do this. This person is going to do that. And there are horror stories and fantasy stories and mystery stories, but all of them are about how do we move through life to the degree that these stories have any real impact. So if it's horror, if it's science fiction, if it's a martial arts fable, if it's this or it's that, they're all about what is true in this context. What are we in this context? And William Gaines, who ran EC Comix, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, startling tales of science fiction. This was a deeply moral man. And if you take a look, they were all stories that the bad guys always got it in the end, always. Right. That there were no stories in which evil was rewarded. That even the nastiest little stories had a moral core to them. They were always, they came from his sense, his deeply moral sense of the universe. So they seem trivial on the surface, but in the aggregate, they're all about how are we going to be. We live lives where we look at people apparently, hurting other people, lying, stealing, conning, and getting ahead, getting the beautiful women, getting the car, getting the this, getting that. And we ask ourselves the questions, well, what is true? Why should I be good? And when you create a little story where somebody does a bad thing and the universe, and maybe they get away with it from the police, but the universe gets them. I think it is a metaphor that is in alignment with the spiritual notion that we cannot operate contrary to the core moral laws of the universe without paying a terrible price. And if you say that in a mundane way, or you say that in a way that a child can understand, you have that internested metaphor that works with all world religions where there are multiple layers of meaning. And the lowest level of meaning is just Newtonian. And then there's another level of meaning that is Einsteinian. And then there's another level of meaning that goes even deeper, till you get to the Dalai Lama saying that the core meaning of life is to seek joy. Now let us speak about how we can seek joy and be in alignment with spirit and contribute to the community and be healthy and happy in the world. So when Chuck introduced the concept of via negativa to be able to teach by negative example, it freed me. It said, yes, we can do this. And I don't have to be too dogmatic. I don't have to clearly label what each of these stories is about. I'm going to ask the reader to engage with me. First of all, just enjoy the story. Just have fun with the story. But then engage with me about the question of why do we like stories? What is story about? What is horror? What is fear? What is hope? What is love? What is sex? These things, when you say to someone, once upon a time, you are dropping them into a trance. It is a hypnotic induction where you're asking them to go back to childhood, where we were surrounded by people who created food and shelter from nothing. Our parents were magicians. We have no idea how they interacted with the world. All we knew is that they loved us, and we loved them like a religious devotee loves the divine. And as we grow up and we start realizing our parents are limited, it is our job to look at those metaphors that religion gives us and philosophy gives us and say, oh, this is what they were trying to say, because it's going to be my turn to turn around and teach my children in a series of stories that on the basic level are simple and engage them and thrill them, but give them a foundation with which they can grow. John sent me a note that said, Eric Draven in The Crow said, mother is the word for God on the lips and hearts of children. Absolutely. My task with my children was to deliver my children safely to their adulthood. And when my son was born, I literally did the roots thing and held him up to the sky and said, behold, the only thing greater than yourself, and promised God that I would deliver him safely to that adulthood. And storytelling is one of the things that without it, I would not have survived. So if I do the best I can, then I am doing God's work as far as I'm concerned. I'm taking my little bit of skill combined with as much honesty as I possibly can have and as much passion and as much skill as I can muster and all the allies I can put together. And we're trying to make the world a better place. And our way of doing that is saying, this is how I honestly see the process of existence. Beyond that, I don't know what anyone can do.
Right. I love it. Amazing.
I'm in.
Oh, so I was just enamored. Sorry. So it's like I need a moment.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I was just.
Steve and I spoke one day, and he just spoke for like an hour and a half. I just sat there and listened. I was like enamored.
I'm listening. I'm telling you, like when we were at a Loyola Marymount, like basically, like I think 2 of Steven's panelists didn't come in. He was like, he had just met me.
He's like, I got this.
And he was like, I got this. He pretty much said that. He's like, oh yeah, they didn't come. Okay, I'm good.
I'm good.
Yeah, so like on every word. I was like, what is going on?
So yeah, so I would say that it almost was presented to me as like a gift, right? And what I mean by that was like a symbolic gift. Because with me, with approaching work, it's like as an artist, it's ego, right? Because you're going to go in, do your best, show off, you're gonna do all that you learned, everything. And after reading the first pass or reading the script, and I realized the work that was involved, I was like, oh, I can't do that. Like I have to remove the ego. And where a lot of that, so it was almost as if like, I wanted to take, when the readers read the book, what you'll notice is that I take them on a journey through my process of my experience with the book. So I didn't look up the definition of Eightfold Path. I never heard of it. And I intentionally didn't look it up because I wanted to experience it, to validate it.
Wow.
Because there's intention behind that, but there's a level of vulnerability that you have to have when exploring those ideas and a level of courage. And so that was really the goal. And long story short, the reason I can validate it was because the time frame we had was pretty tight, and the ability to trust the process. And this would be very like we were talking about like genre, how you incorporate genre, philosophy, and science fiction, these kind of things, these ideas. It's almost as if I already knew what was going to go on the paper based upon trust in a process. So when I was making it, I didn't see that as like mistakes, right? So I want the reader to see these things and to go through it the same way. Now, the outcome of that is what it is, like if they like it or not. But the goal was to take these ideas, these philosophies, these themes, these genres, and have an honest experience with it myself and to validate it. And I feel like I can validate it because I finished it and I made it through the process. So yeah, it was very symbolic. So I would say that I was actually kind of like a guinea pig to their thoughts and their philosophies almost.
That's so great.
In a
You're
great
so
way.
wise when you talk about suspending your ego. The ego is not going to assist you in killing itself.
Right.
Your ego thinks it's you and will kill you to stop you from killing it. So
Steve,
when the flow
Steve,
state.
I was gonna go through the book like aggressively. Like I was just gonna like hammer, like you work through the problem. And that's not the approach, And I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm just saying no. It's validating what you're saying. So yeah, the ego had to go. So it's a very, I think when someone reads it though, I think that's the ideas, right? The ideas that we can experience through genre, these other aspects of spirituality and individuality in a collective. Like all these ideas come together and they almost like disseminate into like it almost everything goes quiet. That's how I felt during the process, almost like it's a safe space. And
it's important to keep connecting with the fact that if spirituality grows out of life, then any description of life is a description of spirit. Any experience of life is a spiritual experience. So I could do, stories about zombies and aliens and, killer machines and all sorts of stuff. And it all, on the surface, if all you want is the booga booga stuff, we got the booga booga stuff for you.
You make sure you touch all those points.
That's right, man. Make no mistake. I love that. I love Tales from the Crypt and EC.
Oh yeah.
I
Right.
grew up on Twilight Zone, and my career started with the Twilight Zone. I grew up on
Steve,
it.
remember
Right.
prior to William Gaines taking over, his father those comics were Christian comics. He was making Christian books, I think.
That's right.
For EC originally was that.
Mhm.
So it's kind of interesting that the son went on to do these
Yeah.
genre, creating the standard for genre-based things.
And then went on to
with
do Mad
morals and-
Magazine.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
Mad
Mad
Magazine.
Magazine was actually deeply moral. If you take a look at Mad Magazine, their heart was always in the right place. You contrast that with the National Lampoon, which was very smart but could be nasty. I mean,
Right.
underneath it all, there was something in the National Lampoon that never had the moral core that Mad Magazine had. I miss them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the irony is that the gentleman that started Abrams Comic Arts used to work for Mad Magazine.
Wow.
Cochran, yeah, he worked
Yeah.
for, because DC ended up buying being over Mad Magazine, and Charles
Right.
worked for years when he worked.
Well,
and when he left
after this
DC
is a bestseller, I'll be hitting Charles up to do the Four Noble Truths follow-up.
there we go. He's that for sure. I mean, yeah, it's really been an honor too to look at the process, And I was going back through these the stories, and I was like, man, which one of these do I feel? Some of them are just so like I want to say like is it the One Endless Night is the one that actually like just sits with me in a particular
Yeah.
way. And I feel like you guys knew it was too, because you even have the people in the caves reacting to it, Not to segue into like which stories are your favorites, but they have their different predilections and things, right? They definitely
One
have-
Endless Night, I love.
yeah.
The Gauntlet, I love. It's a deeply personal experience
Yep.
of my
Yeah.
martial arts experience, and then Chuck's martial arts experience, because we grafted those things together. I
Mhm.
love Chuck so much, and he's been kind enough to make it very clear that I was the seed of these stories, and I created that framework. But his moral guidance and his understanding and the countless hours of conversation we had about these things guided every page, every word, every image. I could hear his voice in my head, and what I wanted was for him, just to be honest about it, I wanted him to approve. I wanted him to say that I was a good boy. I mean, it's like I've still got that little kid part
We're
of
looking
me.
for, yes. I mean,
We all do, really.
Yeah,
You're right.
that's right.
Totally.
And that's what comics and storytelling address. They're aimed at that little kid in us.
Right.
I have a thought. I'm going to share it with you, Steve. We think in terms of narrative. I think that's been demonstrated, and metaphor
Yes.
is so close to our way of thinking, right? I mean, we can't even use the mind to investigate metaphor because it's one of the tools that we use. And so we're storytellers. And I've been telling stories, I guess, since high school. And Steve, we all tell stories all the time. But from a Buddhist perspective, this is basically a tool that we're using. And from a Buddhist perspective, it's called skillful means to communicate to an audience. The Sanskrit word for that is upaya kaushala. Because here's the trick. One day we have to let that go. You can't be holding on to your tools. Think about the Buddhist story that's so classic, where you build a boat to cross the water, to get to the other shore, to cross the Sea of Suffering, right? You get to the other shore. You don't carry the boat on your back when you get to the land. You don't need it. So one of the beautiful things about Buddhism, all the sutras, all the texts, the Tripitaka, the rules for the monks called Vinaya, the sutras, Abhidharma, the metaphysical writing, all of that. These are just tools, and one day you're not going to need them because you will have incorporated within yourself everything that is in the Eightfold Path. So it all comes down to this. Unlike any religion I know of, Buddhism wants you to be free, radically free, even from itself.
Mm. That's
Beautiful.
amazing. Yep.
Beautiful.
Incredible. I was thinking, as y'all were going back and forth about this, Bryan, I mean, you had some, I mean, you basically created a studio around this.
Yeah.
I'm about letting your ego go. You became like an art director / studio,
Yeah.
supervisor.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I can explain that. So what happened
Yeah,
was that, excuse me. So throughout the course of the book, it got down to, it was January when we started the book, end of January, 27th of last year. And what happened, and like, you have to understand, I'm pretty new into like major publishing. I'm used to just doing everything independently. So the way the structure set up is that they need the entire book laid out first with words, so that they can pass that on to the writer, the letterer, in order for them to set the page in. So then when I give them the final art, all they have to do is slap over that lettering. Yep. And then, hit the printer. So, but that process, I didn't bake into my timeline because I didn't know. And so that took about 3 months. So that left us 3 months to actually draw the physical book. I'm known for working really fast, so I can draw. My last book I did a comic for Columbus Public School. I did it in a week, a 24-page comic. So I can work extremely fast.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. And so
a lot of work.
Wow.
It's a lot of work. So with this book, 220 pages in 3 months, I could kill myself, right? Or I could like hire and have my friends help me. So what ended up happening is that this process, and like I said, think about the definition of the Eightfold Path and just like visually what the representation of that would look like. And correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, is just you have a beginning and let's say the end. And we think in life it's this straight process, like things just run because we're reading narrative, right? That's how we construct our existence. But really it goes like this. And then you come out the other side. So that process is scathing, right? It could like eat you alive, or you can like free yourself, remove that ego once again, and allow things to process and happen. So what ended up happening is I created a schedule Monday through Thursday, and I would have my friends come in and we would work on the book. This means like if we're inking that day, because I pencil in the morning, they're inking. So we're passing the pages around in a group of 4 people every 15 minutes so that the style never gets like it never looks like Casey's drawing or John's drawing or Reagan's drawing over here. It's like, no, it's just this constant flow. It got so weird. And Charles is like, whatever you guys did to this book, they were there when they weren't supposed to be there working on it. Like they were so committed to this idea and into it that we would work till like 2-3 in the morning. They would go home and work on the book. And it's like, no one benefits from that. Go ahead, Charles.
Do you remember the old sweatshops?
I was about to say,
Yeah.
you read the line.
Guys sitting around, it sounds like that. That's
Yeah.
incredible.
And so at the time, it was very symbolic because I lived in my mentor's house. Her name's Amina Robinson. And it's a historical location here in Columbus, Ohio, that the Columbus Museum of Art owns. I can send links to everybody later about her. Some of you may have heard of her. Anyway, she's my mentor. So I lived there for a year working on the book. So it couldn't be more symbolic and more of a nurturing process, even though I had to turn out a book in 3 months, could be colored. So I'm working around the clock just in general, like I kept it structured 9 to 5 kind of thing and work weekends on it. And the rest of the time we're just rocking and rolling because it's like, yo, we have to get this book done. And in conclusion, books get delayed a lot and books are always turned in late. This is common. John, you probably have any of stories of books being turned in late or never being delivered. And so, so in conclusion, long story short, we got the book turned in a week late. It was 5 days late. So, which is late in the publishing world. So the book was
like in the publishing world, that's not late at all.
No, that's not late at all. That's still early. So the book was to be delivered June 1st. And so essentially we only had 5 months till the book. Because I remember I got the final draft till my mom's birthday, which is also symbolic, right? We can look at those things. But yeah, so we knocked it out, got it turned in 5 to 7 days past the due date. And I hope everybody was happy with it. So we'll see how that looks. But yeah, so was a exciting experience, and it's something that I'm kind of like addicted to now. Like I kind of like that process.
Mhm.
And I would like to do a trilogy with these two guys, John. So we have to make this book. We have to make it a 3 thing. So I can
That's what we gotta do?
process.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
Well,
know,
it's interesting the way you do, the way
Chuck
you
is a very,
describe.
very busy guy, but if he had the
Yes,
time
he
and
is.
the interest, I love playing with him. So, it's all about whether or not our paths synchronize
Cross
for
again.
a bit again.
Yeah,
It's all,
totally.
who can say?
Yeah.
We're about to
But
say
Go ahead,
Stanford.
Stanford.
It's interesting the way you, the way all 4 of you describe this book coming together. It had me thinking of I was just recently reading some older descriptions of comics and about how at a certain point, my whole, one of my takes on comics is that comics are done by groups of people because ultimately there's no way to do it otherwise. Like there's no way to create that many words and that many pictures and mash them together on a 30-day schedule. So you have to bring other people. So
Well,
ultimately you're working. Yeah.
Stanford, I'm going to add to that real quick. Sorry for interjecting, but think about that even from like the ego perspective. My book, my ideas, and I'm like, well, no, actually spread this out. What does that look like, right? So to your point, that's all.
And yeah, I mean, and the other thing I was thinking of, I mean, actually, it was a note I put down about a little while ago, is just listening to this conversation, right? And thinking about when John first told me about the Megascope imprint, right? The idea is to do something, that focuses on Black speculative fiction, right? But then this conversation, right? Like what have we been talking about? We've been talking about religion, science fiction, philosophy, right? Martial arts, the ego, right? Not necessarily. I mean, these topics aren't quintessentially thought of as Black topics, right?
Right.
And
Right. I see.
And so what I just had this flash in my mind. It's a question for John. It's like you kind of knew that's what you were going to get with this book, and I'm kind of interested in hearing what it was like to pitch this particular book for an imprint that you're getting off the ground that's supposed to be about Black speculative fiction.
Well, just to kind of like elaborate, it's not necessarily Black speculative fiction, but it was like people of color and speculative fiction, right? So it is a broader spectrum. We've been primarily doing books by and about Black folks so far. Yeah, I think the thing is that there, even with open-minded liberal white people who are working in publishing, there are these stereotypical notions about who we are, and despite like our best efforts, a lot of times people are still trying to turn us into monoliths, And one of the things I love about this book is that it's not that. That's one thing that attracted it to me. It's like I would totally, I wanted to put out books that I would want to read. You know what I'm saying? This is the thing, is that's the idea. It's like I'm highly influenced by Vertigo, Karen Berger, who I look at as like one of my idols, actually, who started Vertigo Comics, but with the mentality of like Def Jam Records, where everybody has like their own thing that they're doing. There's not a style, there's not like a particular vein of books that we're trying to do. And I think that whenever I come into like a space where I have to pitch these books, I know that I'm having to educate the audience at the same time. Because very seldom are they going to know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to have to come in. So my pitches look like 40, 50 page books every time. So they're used to it now, because I have to give them like backstory. I have to understand like who these people are, understand like why these things, what's the context, And that's not just for Eightfold Path, that's for almost every book. You know, like if I want to pitch a book on like Matthew Henson, right? I got to come in with a biography of Matthew Henson first, you know what I'm saying, and actually build it out. And it's like this every time. It takes me months and months to put together one pitch for like and I only get like maybe 15 minutes tops to kind of get this across to the to the pub board. Of course, what happens is like when you send this in, editorial is going to send you back comments and stuff like that. But 9 times out of 10, if it gets through editorial, it's gonna go to pub board, which is like where the people who make these decisions live. So that's a tough pitch. It's a tough pitch because I don't know how many people are clocking for like this an EC Comics influenced graphic novel about Buddhism. I don't know if that was necessarily
It sounds insane when you mention it, John, when you word it that way. It sounds crazy.
Yeah, no, when you say it, it's like, what? But here's the thing though. You have to get in front of the people and you have to tell them like, I think this is a wonderful book. I think this is indicative of like the types of books we should be doing, and we're doing things that are experimental. We're trying to break outside of like, and don't get me wrong, I love comics like Luke Cage and stuff like that. I love March, things of that nature. But the other thing is that I told them from the get-go, I don't want this to be the Black suffering imprint. This can't be about this cannot be the Black suffering imprint.
Right.
We are doing a book about the Emmett Till case because I'm from Mississippi. That particular case haunted me my entire life. We are doing that. We did actually a celebratory book about about Juneteenth, not Juneteenth, but the Greenwood massacre, race massacre. So, but from a standpoint that was celebratory about what was lost instead of like trauma in a particular type of way. So the perspectives that I go in when I'm pitching these books is like, well, how can I actually like do a book that is experimental, wonderful, is indicative of like the spectrum of experiences that Black people have had and will be having in the future. Because I do look at it as an Afrofuturist, centered idea. But also I know full well that the idea of a Black future is still a very radical notion in this country. And that's the other thing that I come in there with too. And I do have to say that, Abrams has been extremely supportive. They've been extremely supportive of what we've been trying to do. They love these books the way they nurture them. They sit with us, they fight to try to get them to get the as much as we can for them. I have to understand too, like, Abrams Comic Arts is still kind of the redheaded stepchild of Abrams too. Like they're not as big as the other imprints, because a lot of their money is still being made with the art books. I mean, they just did this doggone thing, this thing.
I thought you said you weren't buying books, bro. Huh? Oh, that's what you did.
Yeah, this thing is like,
okay, there you go.
This is from a different. That's a different Abrams. You know what I'm saying? So we're always like, yo, this is why we need to do this book. So it's always going to be a tricky sale. Some people sometimes they see it, but this was a difficult pitch. It was a difficult pitch, and it was hard shepherding it through. And we had team members leave, like Jasmine Joyner was with us at the beginning,
right.
And Andrew was there at the beginning, and they've moved on to greener pastures. So it takes a lot to shepherd the book through, and it's I think it's wonderful. I think it's a beautiful book. I've read it so many times now. It's like I don't have, I feel like I'm super biased at this point. So, but it's like but I've seen like the ins and outs of it and where it came from, and the different editorial decisions and the conversations and the tensions and trying to get it through, get it pushed through. That's the thing. It's like when Steve referred to it as a baby, it's like having a kid to a certain degree. I mean, it's a literary child.
Yeah.
Well, it's also interesting because the way the story comes out, the way it's spinning stories, but also that it's built around the Eightfold Path, right? Is it really it really brings out the extent to which identity, to which race, to which self is both real and really made up. Mm-hmm. And in some ways you can kind of feel the making as you move through the story.
Yes.
I think that there are only 2 stories that deal directly with race.
Yeah, I saw that.
Maybe 3, but the best barbecue in Hatton County, and the Nun.
And the Nun
directly with race, but the rest of it are stories about honor and dignity and communication and things like that that are more universal subjects, because the world, American has tried to bottle us. America has been sort of a Procrustean bed for Black people, just cutting off the pieces that don't fit their image of what we were. So to a certain degree, by having 8 different stories setting in 8 different worlds, I was doing the best I could to say this is an example of the range of what's going on inside my heart. That this is a clearer snapshot of who I am than any single book that I've ever done. If you take a look at the breadth of it, yeah. So what I was hoping is that the artist would feel the same way, that Chuck would feel that he's able to, express something that he hadn't been able to express, that we're all doing something to kind of push the edge just a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a very edgy book. That's the other thing too. And that's the other thing too, is like the book was really like a litmus test for what I could get away with.
That's good.
Yeah, they pulled
like
us
the
back.
rebellion.
They
Yeah,
pulled
like
us
I'm
back.
telling you, man, it's like, ooh.
There was one story that didn't make it. There was one story that didn't make it. Our
it didn't
sensitivity
make it.
reader said, "Nah, we're not going to let you do this." So
Yeah, but
Actually,
also,
Steve, can you talk about that for a second? Because did you end up writing the next story to replace that? Did you write that on the fly, you and Charles?
yeah, I wrote it in a
Oh
couple
my
of
gosh,
days.
that's
crazy.
insane.
Which
I
is-
had that thing
honestly,
to be in like a day.
There was one called
Steve-
Purple Heart.
Steve wrote that. Yeah, the story Purple Heart.
Yeah, it didn't
Yeah.
make it. Basically they felt that there was some things that would be conceivably considered offensive to a marginalized group, and we don't want that.
right.
Yeah.
And so I wrote I wrote a zombie story,
Which was
called
crazy.
Nut.
So, and how fast, I mean, because I was like, you wrote that so quickly. I was like, what the hell? And honestly, Steve, I think it's a really strong story. It's very
Well,
good.
I'm so glad. I'm
Yeah.
so glad. This
Like,
was
we loved it. I was
I
like-
look at this as a chance of a lifetime.
I'm like, this is the replacement story. And then what they did with the art, that's one of the art style in the Nun is gorgeous too, by the way. The way that it actually
Thank you.
And I got
Really?
to put, if I couldn't be nasty in this way, I put some other nastiness in over here. If there was a
Yeah.
statement concerning race,
it was
the
nasty.
nun goes there.
It really does. And that's the thing. A lot of them are very subtle. They're very subtle, and so Charles has had a chance to sit with him. He actually had a couple. So when you actually went through it, how did you feel about like seeing how these things are being articulated? Because that's the thing too. Because from an editorial, curatorial standpoint, I'm like, are people satisfied or feeling excited about the book? So what are you thinking? Charles, how did you feel when you printed it out? So,
I'm really impressed. I mean, I'm deeply impressed by seeing how it all came together, because I saw the process from the very beginning. Steve generated that replacement story, as you pointed out. It wasn't overnight, but it was damn.
it was damn near.
It was damn fast. And I have seen him do this before. I edited last year a special issue of Chicago Quarterly Review.
Mhm.
And I invited 27, 28 short story writers, poets, essayists to contribute. And, it came out very well, I think. You could get it on, Amazon. It's like a book about African-American literature. But at the last minute, I remembered Steve, and I asked him, Steve, have you got anything? And it was like a week later, I get this story called Rudy. And actually, it echoes with your story. The
Yeah,
Gauntlet.
the gauntlet.
The
That's
Gauntlet.
right.
Mhm.
It
That's right.
speaks to the same real life incident that began my martial arts training.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's two
Wow.
different perspectives on a single incident. Stanford, you've read the book, right?
Yes.
So let me ask you a question. Which of those stories stands out for you, and why?
I'm gonna say it was the one with the it was the more science fiction oriented one, the one with the war with the sponge creatures.
Oh yeah.
The Temple of
The
God.
Temple of his
Temple of his
gods.
God.
Yeah,
Yes,
Temple of
His
his
gods.
God. That
Man,
was
I've
so
been trying
fun.
to tell that story for
It's a great
years.
story.
It's based. It connects to a poem. The Lays of
Mhm.
Ancient Rome.
Yep.
And it was taught to me by Jerry Pournelle, who was one of the great mentors in my life, and it blew me away with the power of what this poem went. and I wanted so much to find some way to speak of this notion that he had given to me of honor and finding a way to bring meaning to life through the way we live, we approach our death. And I thought that in this particular case, I could use it as a way of humans and aliens finding commonality when they seem to have no commonality at all.
Yeah.
Which is a racial metaphor, but doesn't directly connect it. I mean, it's like Sting said that if the Russians love their children too, we have
Exactly.
nothing to fear.
We have nothing to
If you look at the similarities between us, if you focus there are basically no differences at all. That we focus so much on the differences that we've forgotten that we live, we die, we love, we hunger, we tire. When you focus on that stuff, the human family is just one big clan that has had, some nasty arguments.
Right. Pretty nasty.
An interesting side note, Stanford, real quick, is that I hired one of my friends just to learn how to draw a sponge very fast. So that way he was like the special effects sponge
He's
artist.
like the sponge
So
dude.
much
He's like
sponge. Yeah. He's sponge duty all day. So yeah,
you could tell.
look at it again.
So like when I look at the sponge, and this is the thing. Oh my God, there's so many process things we'll ask you. Go ahead, Stanford. You had a point though.
Yeah, you have any interrupt.
One thing that struck me about that is I actually really have this affinity for first contact stories.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I have is because I'm really intrigued as to like, how do you get from that space of radical difference to understanding, right? Especially in science fiction, so it's like we meet this alien race, we meet these people are really different, and I'm really interested in how senses can actually create a situation where you have very incomprehensible like ideas about the world. And that was what struck me about it, because that was something that happened at the very beginning when they're trying to decipher how people are, what's being said. But yeah, because you'd ask me what struck me about it, or what really brought me in.
Yeah.
And that was what really got me about that story.
That is so cool. The poem that it came from was by Thomas Babington Macaulay. It's called Lays of Ancient Rome. And the line goes, basically what's happening is that an overwhelming force is about to destroy a Roman village. And the fathers of the village can help their people escape if someone stands and guards this one bridge. Right. And he's not expected to survive. And so, everybody, when he says this, most of the people kind of say, well, not me. They're whistling and shuffling and looking the other way. And then the poem goes, then outspake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate, to every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
Wow.
Yeah, it's just a
yeah.
That's one of my favorite stories. I mean, I love them all for various reasons, and some of the symbolism that because some of the storytelling happens, of course, and a lot of storytelling happens in art too. Like, what I love about that particular story is that the color palette is in total tension with the story itself. Like the color palette.
Interesting.
Yeah, because it's not. It wasn't the color palette that I probably would have chose for that story, right? It's
yeah,
like,
I wanted to disrupt it. Because like the structure of it, I wanted to like disrupt the flow. And plus, like when you think of alien, I almost like to think out west during like how people were like discovering America, like how they would describe it as like almost like going to these places on Arizona and stuff. It's almost like Mars, they would describe it. And so I kind of like those notions, right? And so I would like to like communicate those kind of ideas. So that's where a lot of that color came from, was something asymmetrical to what we know and familiar with.
I hope to sit down with you one day and get you to talk to me, you and John, more about the choices you made and how you made them. I don't understand that world of art. I mean, Chuck was a professional cartoonist, so he's going to understand those things much more. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah, totally.
Storytelling, I just don't understand.
Yeah, I think it was like I said, it helps to me situate it in that really like outer limits kind of feel, because it's an off-putting color choice to a certain degree, because it's
Totally.
greens and reds, which are
It's
already
garish.
tension with each other. Yeah, and then there's also like the pinks, you know.
Yeah, super garish.
Yeah, and it has that kind of like, but it's in a really lovely tension with the weight of the story.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what makes it, does it, because of the thing that even the you know, you the first thing that me and Bryan collaborated on was a monster art with a monster.
Yeah.
And he sent me this monster and I colored it. And he's like, oh my God, no one's ever colored my stuff like that.
Lightning in a bottle.
He's like, what the
I was
hell?
like, we gotta do this.
Yeah, exactly. And we realized we had a lot in common, and we started working together. He actually drew one of the chapters of Box of Bones, our horror anthology, through Rosarium. And you know, and we've been friends ever since. And so we just kind of figured we had to work together. And you know, I just liked his approach as far as like the way that he uses symbolism. The fact that, for instance, like there's inherent surreal nature, and Stanford, it talks about this a lot too in his work. There's an inherent surreal nature to comics that I think really lends itself well to this. You know, you feel like we're in a dream, right? I mean, that's the piece.
Right.
We're in a construct. Comics, they speak on a very metaphorical, a surreal, strange level. You know, in a comic book, everything is naturalized, right? When you can actually
that's also what makes one of the things I love about the about using these colors is it actually drives home that this is an alien environment, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And I think that you know, as far as like when I talk about what I find really interesting and surreal about comics is the way in which you can manipulate color, you can manipulate line to create something that it's not about illustrating what's happening on the surface. It's actually about illustrating what's happening beneath the surface and like pulling that out.
Exactly.
So
yeah, it's attracting the subconscious. Exactly.
Right. So
and that was the goal.
That's where comics to me gets to be the most interesting, is where you're telling a story about the conscious life through the unconscious almost.
That's right. It's a strangeness to it. It's unlike any other medium. I mean, like you really could not pull off the stuff that we did in this book, you know.
On TV or anything.
You couldn't do the nun. No. The nun would not have as much power, you know, in another medium. It wasn't.
I like to bring up another example. So if we look at the Savior, it's the last story. That story is really critical, because it's the reveal. I won't talk about the reveal here.
Please
but
don't.
The perspective.
I'd hate to have to kill you. You seem a nice man.
You're gonna come. I'll knock on my door. I'm like, how is Steve on camera and knocking on my door at the same time? Right. So, but if you look at the story, we learn about this robot's experience, right? And so I intentionally like made it as if the robot was learning. So if you look at the color palette, I'm treating it as if like there's something circuiting. So if you about how we perceive reality, rods and cones in our eyes, and how the same receptor that we have dream experiences is the same we do when we touch things. I wanted to remove that to make it kind of cold. So it's the idea of like a TV being like, it's RGB, like missing a color, and then the colors are extremely limited. You've seen these before that like are missing part of the color, or if you take the color out. So I kind of wanted to give it that feeling, which is like this cold steel. And then you can see that change at the end when I start using like the lavender cellos once the robot learns and reflects and all those kind of things. So there's a lot of intention with the coloring. Technique wise,
really, really obviously very intentional, you know.
Yeah. And with the
That's
first
amazing.
story, doing
Well
things
done,
with
Bryan.
like scanning. Thank you. Like I scanned the Bible to put it as the wallpaper, but it's like this graphical design. A lot of that stuff comes out of like artistry, you know, from the 50s. Like all these are just traditional things I've learned throughout the course of painting and making comics, implemented at its finest points, trying to, at least. That was the attempt.
So Bryan, if you had to speak to some of your artistic influences, you know, who would they be, as far as like, and not necessarily comics, but just like when you were speaking this language, what voices are you listening to?
Yeah, a lot of it comes, and for this book, a lot of it comes from like Goya, the idea of myth. So the way that Goya handles myth, um, it's called Los Caprichos, which is like this book of these prints he did. If you check them out, you'll see that they're copper infused like prints that were printed off of, and they made them into books. That work that he did there has a lot of like fable folklore, but it's very graphical, so it's very realistic, as if he's documenting fantasy as a news report. So I pulled a lot of that. Obviously, comics wise, like Jack Davis, Alex Toth. These are really heavy influences. A lot of this came of the art influences from this book were to tap the, like you were saying, Stanford, the subconscious, not to rip off EC, but to what does that subconscious look like when we raise it? And so those are like nuances and things. So what I mean by that is if we look at like the first story, I remember Charles sent me image of the like crypt keeper kind of character.
Swamp Woman.
And so what's that?
Swamp Woman.
Yeah, Swamp Woman. So it's like, so taking something like that and incorporating it comes from a different experience. So then by incorporating that, that's like a flavor, right? So I'm tagging these things as like almost as inspiration, and then it just filters through me and comes out the other side. So for example, Swamp Woman image is a direct response to Charles, like exclusively. So that's a conversation he and I are having, but everyone else is privy to it. So that's usually the approach. It's more of an intimacy, and that goes for each story. So there's a lot of intention behind that, and that's where a lot of those influences helped me along the way. One more I would give you, like Philip Gustin, who's a painter, abstract expressionist, gone to figure work, became kind of like a precursor to like Basquiat in a lot of ways, like heavily influenced Basquiat.
Yeah.
And so these are the kind of ideas that you bring in, but you don't exploit it. It's like you just deliver it. And it's like, oh, here's a nuance that some people understand, some people don't. So you're just throwing out ideas. So yeah, that's where a lot of it comes from.
I saw a bunch of people. I saw like a Gustav Klimt. I saw
Egon Oh yeah, there's a heavy Klimt.
I saw Ted McKeever. I saw Dave McKean. I saw
you got a sharp eye. I'm over here trying to be smart.
Oh, I know it. I know
calling me out on all of the tricks I pulled.
I know what I'm looking at, man. I know what I'm looking at. You know,
yeah, totally.
So he created. I mean, it's almost like create a mashup style for a very, very different type of book, and you know, I think it works.
Yeah,
I think it's
the intention.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah, and the intention was to make it almost kind of generic, and what I mean by that is that we're going to reduce the style so that it's not this ego thing. When going back to that, it's more like, hey, let's refine the idea so that it has a larger audience to come into.
Yeah.
Because if I'm overalling and doing all this like jazz type stuff, it removes. So it's almost treating it like R&B. You know what I mean? It's almost like you're kind of like making it sexy for the audience, opposed to like this tour de force. So the tone is important too to that, because some of it ramps up pretty core with the action. So I always wanted to retain that. Example of like the gauntlet I did in duotones, which is just orange, white, black, gray. But that was because of letting the story take not the color doesn't need to be a distraction to Steve's story and Charles's story of what they're trying to tell. That's a very personal story of Steve, and I don't want to throw in stuff to like flourish it or like exploit that. It's like just being vulnerable and just communicating sometimes is the most important thing. So those are the kind of things where I really pull back and just like removed the color or kept it super simple. So a lot of that's very intentional.
Well, one thing is, I mean, this is an amazing book, and it was a really great experience. You know, I'm wondering if each of you have any like last things you'd like to end on, because we're kind of out of time. Any final thoughts?
For me, you know, it's I mean, I know this was a long time coming for Charles and Steve, you know, you know, but I was like, as a curator, you know, to actually take it from like from the beginning process is working through it, you know, it's just been a really lovely experience, and I'm very proud of the book. You know, I'm very proud of it.
For me personally, it's just to honor Charles and Steve, and to do my best for John. It's literally like my responsibility, and I feel, actually, I know it's going to sound weird, like whatever. I don't have a problem being vulnerable. I felt it was like a life goal. I feel like I was preparing for this moment, kind of thing, as an artist, you know. So to be able to deliver something that is their first is just like, I mean, you have to think about it. My career's set now because of these two gentlemen. Like, they didn't have to do that. John didn't have to take a risk. So I'm just here as a humbled servant. It's like I said, I'm just honored to be with you guys. That's all.
I think we all feel that way. I feel that way.
Wow.
I just listened to a conversation between Stephen King and Lee Child talking about writing, and that, you know, the story is what it is. You know, the someone asks, why didn't you do this as opposed to that? And it is what it is. A lot of the time I map out stories before I write them because I can't afford to be going down a blind alley. This was definitely more a case where the stories were what they were, where they came to me, a world, a theme, characters to explore these things. And all I can say about this is it takes a village, you know, period. It takes a village. When you are trying to work in service to the muse, then be a cold day in hell before I take responsibility for any of this. I'm glad to be part of the process. I'm proud of it. I'm so grateful to have had this moment. And I'm so grateful to the team for making this happen. And just from the bottom of my heart, thank you for helping this moment to happen.